For step 1, draw the picture with an HB pencil and then mask out the blue umbrella and also the light areas of the sky through the trees. So my masking fluid has dried naturally and I'm mixing up some colours for the foliage of the trees, but also for the leaves on the road. And I'm just sort of painting a very dilute ultramarine, just where the sky area is. And remember, I've actually masked out some of the light there of the sky. I'm going to go in now with a little bit of the transparent Pyrrole orange, wet into wet, just where it's very orangey in the foliage here. So going in with the Mayan orange, which is a little bit more of a red orange, and I'm just painting that in wet into wet here and there. So this is the alizarin crimson. I'm painting this wet into wet. So I'm getting a little bit of quinacridone gold here with the burnt sienna and just painting this sort of just above the horizon to the left of the trees here, damp into wet now, so the paint isn't as wet. Getting some more of the ultramarine here and just painting a paler colour along the horizon, adding some of the quinacridone gold there, just along the horizon, wet into wet with my size 8 brush, adding that beautiful limey green colour and actually mixing up some creamy cadmium yellow pale there, and just dropping that in damp into wet, and I'm tilting, getting the paint moving, adding a touch more of the quinacridone gold and tilting it up and down and across just to see what happens. And I'm just tilting, getting everything moving and blending on the paper together. Mixing up some ultramarine here with the burnt sienna and just painting the sort of dark here to the left, damp into damp, and then adding a little bit of dark there just at the bottom of the fences and along the road to the bottom of the left hand side of the painting. And I'm tilting as I'm painting as well. Painting a little bit of that ultramarine with a pinch of burnt sienna on the horizon. I'm sprinkling some table salt onto the damp paper. I'll allow that to dry naturally. I'm also using an Inktense pencil. You can use a watercolour pencil and some sandpaper and just rubbing the tip of the pencil against the sandpaper, and the pigment falls onto the wet surface and it kind of sticks because it's wet. I've used an orange and a brown. I'm also using brush show. I'm using a little bit of moss green in the sort of foreground area, and I'm using crimson and sprinkling it onto the foliage of the trees here and there as well. And my painting is damp, so the brush show sort of sticks but also spreads as well to create some lovely textures. Now, if you don't have brush show, don't worry, you can always spatter, which is what I'm doing here, and you can spatter wet into wet, damp into wet, damp into damp, but also wet on dry. So you've got lots and lots of options. So I'm actually spattering the alizarin crimson here, so where that lovely, beautiful crimson tree there is in the middle and on the right, but I'm also spattering in the top left-hand corners. Some areas of the painting are still a little bit damp, others are drying off a bit. So you'll get different textures there. As you can see in the middle, it's almost dried in those trees, but here it's a little bit damp. So you get different results. That's what I love about experimenting in watercolour. You get all these yummy effects there. So I'm spattering some of that cadmium yellow pale just here and there. I'm spattering wet into wet there along the horizon line. I've allowed my painting to dry naturally, and I'm brushing off the salt and I'm removing the masking fluid. So I'm painting the people now wet on dry. I'm using my size 8 brush and I have mixed up ultramarine and burnt sienna. I'm just painting the jacket here, so it's quite dark. And what happens, because they are quite dark in the photograph, but what will happen is they will come forward and they're kind of the stars of the show. So I've really got a dark against light here. It works really well. So this is my first initial wash, and I'm just taking my time painting in the sort of shape here. What's quite lovely is some of the underpainting is coming through to create some quite nice textures. I'm going to paint the trousers. I've added some Prussian blue to this colour, and you can see I'm ending in a sort of point almost, so there's no hands, no neck, neck, no feet, and no facial features. So these are little people, and I will put a link in the description below of a tutorial I published a while ago about how to draw and paint little people. So I've changed this colour slightly for the person on the right hand side. I've mixed in some red with a little bit of that alizarin crimson. So it's a bit similar to the colours in the background, but I'm going to paint some shadows to sort of bring this figure forward. Adding some ultramarine now, and I'm going to paint the sort of trousers wet on dry with this sort of dark sort of blue. If you're worried about that colour bleeding in to the red coat, allow the coats to dry before you paint in the trousers. And I'm just painting a little bit of cast shadow, which isn't in the photograph, but it really grounds people. So I'm actually painting it from left to right, so the light's coming from the left. And I'm painting the heads now using the ultramarine and burnt sienna, using my size 8 round brush, painting wet on dry. I've left a little gap between the coat and the head so that the dark colour doesn't run into the coats. I'm adding a little bit of dark shadows now on the coats, damp into damp, but you may want to do this wet on dry. I'm using a mixture of the ultramarine mixed with the alizarin crimson, and just adding some darks on the trousers as well, just using the tip of my brush with the ultramarine and burnt sienna. So I've mixed up some burnt sienna with a pinch of ultramarine, and I'm painting the trees. If you notice, I've turned my painting sideways. I just find it easier to paint not just tree trunks, but anything sort of long and thin. So I'm just adding some ultramarine and burnt sienna, slightly darker, and I'm just painting the dark side of the tree. That's the right hand side, damp into damp. I've decided where the light's coming from. I've used a bit of artistic license. Once you do that, just make sure you're consistent. So all the light's coming from the left and all the darks and shadows are on the right hand side. So I'm going to continue on now painting the tree trunks and branches wet on dry. So just adding a little bit of shadow at the bottom of this tree here, casting it on the right hand side using the burnt sienna and ultramarine. I am painting the fence on the right hand side. I'm actually using some Payne's grey and burnt sienna, but you could carry on using the ultramarine. I'm being sort of very loose here, painting this wet on dry using my size 8 brush. And I'm going to continue on now painting the tree trunks and branches. Just lifting off some of the light on the left hand side of the tree and then just painting some darks on the right hand side using my size 8 round brush. So really building up the detail here, working with these mid to dark tone washes here. I'm using my size 4 round brush as I'm painting in these darker branches here. I'm just painting some of the leaves that have fallen on the road and path here using a mixture of the burnt sienna with some quinacridone gold. It's wet on dry pretty much in the foreground, but the shadow here that I painted earlier is still a little bit damp. You may want to wait for that to dry a little bit more. I'm trying to sort of create different sort of marks, not all the same marks. So try to be really kind of random, bigger leaves in the foreground, smaller leaves in the middle ground. I'm also going to add some cast shadows of the trees here in the middle using a dilute burnt sienna with a pinch of ultramarine. I'm using a natural sponge to sort of print the foliage. So I'm starting off with that Mayan orange, which is kind of like a cadmium red pale. And I'm pressing very gently. Now what I do with a sponge, which is a really good tip, is get your sponge, rinse it under the tap, wring all of the water out, and then use quite creamy watercolour to paint with, and always mix up big puddles and press very, very gently, and do practice this beforehand. I'm pressing really gently to create these lovely dark textures, and I'm sponging very gently some of this lovely limey green colour, and I'm sponging this orangey, creamy orange colour here and there with my natural sponge, just to really build up all these autumnal colours. So I am watering down the alizarin crimson, Payne's grey and burnt sienna wash, and I'm just spattering that here and there to create sort of texture, darks and details. I'm adding a touch more yellow to this colour, this yellow ochre, white and cadmium yellow pale, and just spattering this lovely light colour. You can see how it really does add light and texture and details. I'm removing the masking fluid and I'm going to paint the umbrella, adding a touch more dark just at the bottom of the umbrella using the tip of my brush. Again, take your time. So I'm just sort of tidying up the bottom of the umbrella there and just lifting off some more light on the top, middle and right hand side of the umbrella. You can do this with a clean, damp brush. So here is the finished painting. I really hope you enjoyed this tutorial with all the amazing sort of textures using the spattering, the sponging, the watercolour pencils or ink tints, along with the salt and the brusho. You don't have to use all of these materials, you could just use some of them and just have fun using these beautiful autumnal colours. If you have any questions, please put them in the comments section. Thanks so much for watching. Happy painting. Bye for now.